Alright guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over some of my decks for day 1 and day 2 of GP Vegas. I did manage to draw into top 32 with a final place of 23rd, so that was fun and exciting. I did kind of punt away my opportunity for top 8, which we will go over when we get there. But yeah, so I thought it would be kind of fun just to kind of answer some of chat's questions, take a look at the decks. I kept my decks actually intact, but I couldn't find a camera that was good enough for me to do a top-down view so you guys would actually get to see the cards. So instead I went ahead and just recreated my decks in Arena. It does mean I won't be able to show you guys all my sideboard options quite as easily, but I will thumb through and show you guys what we had going on. Particularly with this first sealed pool that you guys see before you, I have a little bit of a greedy splash. You're going to see only 2 red sources here in the mana base for 2 removal spells, which I have no problem justifying, and also this random Markov Waltzer here, which is probably something that I spent the most time kind of debating. The other thing about this pool is I actually had my preview card. We had a Pack Song Pup, which is a really cute card. And we also had one other Sporeback Wolf. And these were the only wolves we really had in the format. I didn't even have red wolves I could splash. So that put me at, including the other Sporeback Wolf, it only put me at, I believe, 4 or maximum 5 other wolves to trigger the Pack Song Wolf. The other note is that I actually had Hamlet Vanguard, which is the human synergistic side of this, but I was very light on humans, so I couldn't run both of these packages, and neither package was very good in general to like bring it ahead of the other. So I ended up cutting, I felt like my 2-drops were a little too heavy, so I decided to cut a Sporeback Wolf and the Pup, removing my wolf package, but keeping in the Traveling Minister to hopefully curve into Hamlet Vanguards on 3. Now, again, going back to this kind of greedy splash is these are really the strongest cards I was cutting. So I could remove the removal, play these cards, and have this very weak wolf synergy in my deck, and I was not a huge fan of doing that. So alternately, I decided to be a bit greedier because I didn't think my pool was quite strong enough to get there on its own. So I decided to splash my removal, which was, you know, pretty premium. Abrade and Lacerate have overperformed. Lacerate has overperformed for me, and Abrade we knew was going to be good. And then the Markov Waltzer is a greedy splash, which, you know, looking back at my pool, I'm also not playing like a Witch's Web, which is a pretty decent combat trick. I'm also not running a Toxic Scorpion, which is a fine card. But again, my 2-drop slot is definitely pretty stacked, so we don't need it. So I decided to just play something that's going to be a bit better. And as you guys will see, we'll talk about a little bit later here in this particular pod, is that I was one red land away from winning my only round that I lost in day 1 because they were at 2 and I'm sitting with a Markov Waltzer in my hand, which comes into play hasty for 2 damage, and they wouldn't have been able to block it. So I had like 4 turns to draw a red source and missed, but we actually only got kind of red screwed that one time, and that is because of this all-star, the Foreboding Statue. This card, I played it a ton throughout the weekend and it overperformed for me. I loved it. Yeah, this was a solid 3. It let me ramp into my Infestation Experts and my Brambling Worms, getting a ton of power on the board very, very early, and then they themselves turn into a threat. So you like ramp into your Infestation Expert and your opponent has to dump their removal into these sort of, you know, aggroed out bigger threats, and then surprise, you have this 5/5 and they have no more removal to deal with it. So that was very strong. Spore Crawler is another card that I thought before the weekend, just from drafting, has impressed me. This card has overperformed. It trades well. It gives you card advantage in colors that don't typically have them. So that was really good. Hamlet Vanguard is one of our rares, but I would not say it was a bomb. This was a 5/5 twice in the weekend and immediately died. It was a 3/3 for 3, which is good most of the time, and that's fine. So here we are. The all-star of the draft, of course, is Wedding Announcement. This has won several games. In fact, we had some Wedding Announcement mirrors that were pretty intense, pretty wide boards. I did have an opponent play their Wedding Announcement first against me pretty early on, and then I just kept building up this wide board. I couldn't get through because their creatures were bigger, but I was going much wider. And I ended up getting into a situation where they got a little greedy and attacked me in the air to put me to lethal in 2 turns, but I was able to get a Wedding Announcement and trigger it the turn before I would have died, and swing back for like 23 points of damage, which was really, really good. So overall, I think the deck performed very well. Infestation Expert was really nice. My first or second round opponent had a ton of creatures and trample. They ended up having the 3/3 enchantment, equipment that you could sack a forest to give trample. So I was able to take the damage when they would sack something to give it trample, and then the times they attacked and didn't because they were running low on land, I was able to just block with the little insect token, and it really did save me. So I ended up, now that you guys have talked a little bit about the deck itself, I ended up going 5-0, losing round 6. And then winning the last 2 rounds to go 7-1. 6, 7. Yeah. Maybe I lost round 5? No, I was definitely 5-0. And then 5-1. Okay, so that's round 6. And then I won 7 and 8. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was confused. Math is hard. I can't count to 8, don't mind me. Another card that we sided in quite often, which is the only really card that we did, just looking back here on my pool, we didn't dip into the red for anything else, and we really didn't dip into too much. I did side in a few Toxic Scorpions against Wolves. This was a card that I removed things like Markov Waltzer, and I removed things like Shield Basher because it doesn't pair very well against Wolves. We're not winning that race. It doesn't block well, so but I also brought in the Honored Heirloom. This was a piece of fixing that I opted not to play because I had the double Foreboding Statues, but this card is great against any graveyard synergies, all of the Disturb cards, anything like that. Black that wants to be recurring a ton of their cards. So this is a great sideboard, and I definitely recommend bringing this in any of your sealed pools. I think I brought this in at least 3 times over the first day of the GP, and it was really helpful. If you if you're splashing, you can go ahead and just put it in the main, and then sometimes you'll get a nice little bonus when you actually activate it. But you can always just keep this in the side for your 2-color decks if you're drafting or whatever, and bring it in when needed, and it's super helpful. You'll be surprised how much it comes in handy. One of the things I would like to mention for sealed, when you guys are returning to paper, you know, in between, after game 1, make sure you guys are looking through your entire pool, because every once in a while, especially an artifact like that, you'll have it kind of buried in the back of your pool, and you won't think about it. You know, oftentimes there is just these little unexpected things that are kind of good in particular situations. So if you're not thinking about it, especially if you learn to play Arena, play Magic on Arena, then you're not really thinking about sideboarding, because in Premier drafts we don't have to. So it is very, very important to be checking those things. Brambleworm, I'm just going to kind of go back through and cover a couple of cards. I won a couple of close games after playing Brambleworm and exiling it, where if I didn't gain that 10 life, I would have definitely lost. Lacerate overperformed. Heron is not very good. I don't have a ton of enchantments in my deck, so we are not going to be getting that back very often. I think Wedding Announcement was really the only one, and the Infiltrate. So we didn't make a ton of 1/1s here, but it was just a 3/3 flyer. It fit the curve nicely. We didn't have too many 5+s, so I felt comfortable running it as a 5-mana 3/3 with some occasional upside. Mariner is just a huge beater. The Cemetery Protector actually didn't see a ton of play. It did win me 2 games, not 2 full matches. There was one where I was super far behind and I was able to eat a land with this and make just enough blockers to survive and stabilize when I was flooding out. So eating a land ended up giving me far more 1/1s than anything else could have, and it saved my butt. One other situation where the Cemetery Protector came in handy was round 5. I'm undefeated at this point, and my opponent in game 3 slams a lobster. And yeah, they had one spell. I'm sorry, they had 2 spells back, and I kept 2 blockers. I was pretty far behind for most of the game, and they could have bounced both blockers, but this has flash, so I could replay it. They needed a 3rd spell, which they just did not have. And yeah, that was great. If I would have left 1 less blocker, knowing that this had flash, they could have bounced it twice, right? I would not have had the mana to cast it again. So that was really, really nice. I had a nice wide board. I was able to swing in through the lobster, lose a guy, and they could not come back. They had 3 mana with the overcharged amalgam and a lobster. They were basically playing blue constructed. And I was at 10. So I was able to save myself with this beautiful flash creature. A couple of games, Shield Basher actually won me more games than Cemetery Protector because I would suit up the Infiltrate onto the Shield Basher and just go in for 6 indestructible every turn. And if your opponent cannot remove it with some sort of spell, game freaking over. That is tough to deal with, especially when you are already kind of ahead on board. So that was a nice thing to have in the deck. A little light on removal. Again, you know, this Imprisonment was really nice. It gives you a redraw later in the game with the blood token. But yeah, I didn't have a ton of removal. I had 1 Retribution, 1 Imprisonment, and 1 Wolf Strike in my colors. So the Abrade and the Last Rate were a nice addition. 2 drops. I was running Dawnheart Disciple, even though, and Vampire Slayer, even though they're not quite as good as the Sporeback Wolf on their own, I believe, in the main deck. But we had Hamlet, so I kind of wanted to give myself the opportunity to get that 3 mana 5/5 when possible. And that's it. Circle of Confinement. Definitely top decked this and won a game. Overall, it's not exciting, right? Like, Wedding Announcement, that's a bomb. But the rest of the deck is pretty uneventful. You know, we're not running Planeswalkers, there's no crazy dragons. It's just solid stuff, solid curve, good mana base with the Foreboding Statues, and we were able to get there 7-1. Okay, so that's my day 1 deck. So now that we've talked about day 1, let's go ahead and talk about day 2. Now, day 2 is getting to the point where I'm starting to be a tad bit exhausted. So Friday before the event, I actually flew home for an Extra Life event, which was a bonus opportunity I had after booking my flights for Vegas. So I ended up flying home for a total of 6 hours and then getting back on a plane and going back to Vegas. I slept for a few hours and then played day 1 for 8 rounds, which I was pretty beat after, had a quick dinner with some friends, and then had to play in day 2, which kind of a mistake. Kind of wish I didn't day 2, but at this point, 2 days of like minimal sleep and heavy magic and flights and nonsense, I'm starting to feel it. So I didn't have great hopes for my ability here in day 2, but it was fine. The interesting thing about the format in day 2, when it comes to competitive drafts, is everybody opens their packs, right? We verify we have 14 cards, and then everybody takes their flip cards and shows them to the entire table. Like, we all have to hold them up, go like this so everybody can see them, tell them what card it is, and then after that, you don't really have to do a ton. So my pack 1, pick 1, was kind of a dud pack. It had a crap rare, and it had no removal, and it had a ton of nothing. Now, the interesting thing is you have to keep your eyeballs to yourself, but you can see when your opponent drafts a flip card. And in fact, they often have to put them up, saying that they are taken, because if someone, like if the person next to me does it and I notice, it's unfair for the other people at the table to not have that advantage. So my opponent immediately slams on my left-hand side, slams a red card, and this foil, Voltaic Visionary, was the only good playable in my entire pack. So I'm a little hesitant at this point to take it because I know my opponent took a red card. So pack 2 is going to be a little rough on the way back if they do decide to stay in red, but honestly, there was nothing else playable. So I ended up taking this Voltaic Visionary, pack one, pick one, and from there I started taking a couple of white cards, thinking I might, like, I took a Retribution in like pick 2 or pick 3, and it kind of dried up. I also took, in a kind of dead pack, I think a Thirst for Discovery, thinking I could possibly splash either the Thirst or whichever way. But very, very quickly in pick 4, we ended up getting the Tormented Prophet. So I was like, this card is nuts. I'm happy. I'm all about it. So I decided to very quickly just commit to blue. Red, blue seemed open. I pack one, picked one, a red. And then again in pack 1, we also got the Wandering Mind pretty early, and I felt very strong. We ended up getting pack 2. I opened Olivia's Attendant, thinking, okay, well, we might not see any red this pack, because I think my neighbor on my left is red, but we opened up this Olivia's Attendant. If I'm not mistaken, I actually got one Abrade and then one Lacerate in pack 1 as well. Pack 2 opened the Olivia's Attendant, and then just kind of got a ton of blue going that direction, not a ton of red as I expected, which is why I think the red is a bit light here, but overall I was pretty happy with it. And then again, you know, most of that action was just in pack 1, and pack 2, and then the rest was just mostly filler. I was a little concerned about my Scabs and my Stitched Assistants not having premium exploit targets, but we had a couple of people lock our stuff down with enchantments, like the Sigarda's Imprisonment. We were able to sack one of those in response, but also we did have some premium spells, so sometimes sacking something was not that bad. If you're going to get a Lacerate and redraw some cards as well, feels good. Voltaic Visionary was a bit of an all-star. It got me a couple of lands when I was stuck on 2 or 3. I was able to activate it, get an extra draw or a peek at a card, and oftentimes it is a land, and that was really helpful as well. Bit of an all-star. And this Prophet, you know, a couple of games I just went turn 3 Prophet, draw 2 cards every turn from there, and my opponents really couldn't do much. I did go 0-2 in the first pod, and in the finals played a Hall of Famer who has the record for most GP top 8s, like in the neighborhood of like 40 top 8s or something, and they did end up top 8ing this event as well. I got a teeny bit unlucky. Game 1 was not a game. They curved out with like 3 green bombs. Game 2 was tough. They got stuck on land a little bit for a turn, but still played 2 more bombs, 2 more rares, and I barely got there. I was going to lose the next turn. I ended up getting there with an attack with a Wander Light Spirit. I got there in game 2. And then game 3, I had a beautiful opening hand, 1 mana of each color, lots of 2-drops, lots of removal, a 2-drop removal, 1 of each color land, and we had the Abrade to get like some of those early bombs. They were playing Selesnya aggro, so we had an Abrade, a Lacerate, a Fearful Villager, and the Voltaic Visionary. So it feels like a beautiful, you know, thing. We're gonna get the card advantage. We have early blockers. We've got, you know, this blocks. We got removal. And then it took me 6 draws to find the 6th land, the 3rd land, which is exactly the time I died. So a little sad that that we ended up going 2-1 in that first draft pod. It's Shuhei. I'm sorry, I might be saying their name wrong. I know someone mentioned it to me, but I don't exactly remember what the name was. But that was who kicked my ass royally in first draft pod. But I liked the deck overall. It felt a little medium, but I figured the removal and the profit would get me there, and I think that's exactly what happened. Round 2, I had a pretty tough opponent who had a really cool control deck. And then I managed to aggro them out just fast enough in some really, really close games where, you know, one turn in any direction and I would have been done for. Okay, so we have one more draft deck to talk about. This is, you know, draft in 3 rounds, and then we draft and do 3 more rounds. And this was my last draft deck, guys. Pack one, pick one, Dread Feast Demon. This is arguably one of the better bombs in the entire format. And yeah, this card's great. No reason not to love this card. In fact, I think if I had to pick a card, and I actually did going into this draft, I think someone asked me like, what are the 2, you know, cards you'd like to open? I think this was the first card out of my mouth, and I opened it pack one, pick one. So I think I might be a witch, but we ended up getting into red kind of late. So originally I picked the Dread Feast Demon, and then Manatee was there. I think Manatee is the one that asked me the question. Yeah, can confirm. Yeah. So pack one, pick one, Dread Feast Demon. And then I took a Retribution and a lifelink card for white. And my goal was to be in the white-black life gain deck with some cards like Specimen and Solid Removal. But white was really not open. We had a very, very strong pack one for black, and then it fizzled out. Pack 2 and pack 3, so little. My white was really bad in pack 1. Pack 2 came around. I was not seeing white or black. It was just super bad. We ended up getting a pick for pack 2 Abrade. And this is where I made the switch to red as opposed to white, and none of the white was strong enough for me to splash. So I ended up being really light on playables because I ended up taking a couple of random green cards, a couple of random blue cards. I wasn't seeing either white or black, so I really wasn't sure where we were until I saw the Abrade pick 4 into a pick 5 Lacerate, and I was like, okay, I have to make a commitment. Here we are. This is where we ended up. Cards of note here. You know, our first 2 red cards were that mid pack 2, and we ended up closing it off with cards like Lightning Wolf and Celebrants late in pack 2. Pack 1 looked pretty strong. We had the Dreadfast Demon, the Courier Bat, the Farmer, and the Gluttonous Guest. But that's kind of it, because a lot of the other stuff was sort of filler white cards that we didn't end up using. Pack 3 went a bit better. We ended up picking up a Specimen, which is something I really wanted for my demon. We ended up picking up an Evolving Wilds in the middle of pack 3, and we picked up another Tormented Prophet. Now, this is a greedy splash. I don't have any fixing in the deck. I have 1 Evolving Wilds, and that's it. This card I actually opened. I had a foil one of these in my pack along with some other trash rare. But at this point, I'm like, okay, I have no fixing. And I don't want to like destabilize my deck too much for Demon. However, I'm thinking to myself, if nobody's in these exact colors, maybe it comes around. I never thought it would in a million years, but I did pick up a mid-pack Evolving Wilds in 3, and this wheeled. It came back with, 5 cards in the pack, so I was like, okay, I guess we're going to take this. And I had no other playable black cards. I think the only thing I think I had is a second Pointed Discussion that I could have ran. There was no other red cards in the pool, like 0. I had some trashy white cards. I could have possibly did like a Retribution removal spell, but there was nothing else in white to really justify that. And this is just way better than a one-off white removal spell, I think. And this ended up being very, very good. Yeah, I didn't feel super greedy. It was basically 2 sources with the Evolving Wilds. It's basically free. And if I ever got to play it, it's going to win a game. So it felt fine. The other thing is that the deck actually makes a fair amount of blood tokens, which means I can dig for the land. But it also means if I get stuck on this, I can just get rid of it. That was a nice fail-safe plan in that I could make some bloods, right? We had bloods with the Lacerates, the Celebrants, the Gluttonous Guest. There were a fair amount of things. The Blood Fountain. The discussion itself makes a blood token. So it didn't feel like there was a ton of downside to this. This is also an 18 land deck. Again, I decided to make this decision because of the Dreadfest Demon. I wanted to make sure I got there. Also the Ritual. This deck overall felt weaker than my previous deck. Stronger bombs, but overall less cohesive, weaker curve, greedier mana base. So I decided to run an 18 land deck with the idea that when I started to flood out, I had plenty of blood tokens to get rid of those lands and redraw. All right, so this is where I threw away my opportunity for day 2. I'm sorry, for top 8 in round, what is it, 8, 9, 10, 11, so round 12. I should have won by a lot and just chose not to. Instead, I made it a very close game that I barely lost. And the reason for that is because I forgot Specimen was in my graveyard for an entire like 30-minute game. Now, why is this relevant, you might ask? Because I had Demon on board and I ended up sacking like 5 other creatures to Demon, and I just died to a super wide swing and I died by like 1 health. So I could have had 5 more creatures on the board if I just kept bringing back the freaking Specimen. Because they kept killing, I would make a demon, they would kill 1 demon, and I kept sacking, a creature and making a new demon, so I always had 2. But I didn't need to sack those creatures because all I needed to do was bring back the Specimen, and that was a game 3 that went basically, that game did go to time. And yeah, I should have won by like 5 more dudes and had no problem crushing them. I actually had 2 demons out at one point and could have sacked 2 creatures. And I couldn't because I didn't have 2 creatures to sack, but kinda did. I just didn't make demons for no reason at all. And I noticed it like at the end. I was getting really tired and really exhausted. My opponent played a Planeswalker that game. He played Sorin, which is the best Planeswalker in the set. So I think my brain was just more thinking about what was on their board than what I could be doing. Yeah, I think I just had exhausted brain, played bad. That was my game that I threw away. The next round, round 13, I didn't play a ton of Magic. I won. My opponent got stuck, smooshed him, and then I got stuck and he smooshed me, and then he got stuck and I smooshed him. So that was a pretty quick, easy game. I wouldn't have played that opponent if I didn't throw away the previous round. So it's hard for me to say I would have had top 8 contention because I wouldn't have had the same match. But hypothetically, if I had won the game that I threw away, all I would have had to do was win 2 more rounds and I would have been into top 8 because I had good breakers. So it was a little disappointing. But again, we wouldn't have been paired against the opponent we were. So, you know, it's hard to say. And then I beat that opponent, and then I went into the 1-1 bracket for the last round, and my opponent and I decided to go ahead and draw because we had very good breakers from day 1, being in the X1 and X2 pods. There were X2 pods below us because the pods are organized by breaker. So all of the, XOs, X1s are in the same pod, and then the next pod is the X1s or X2s with the best breakers, and then the next ones are the breakers under them. So I was in pod 2, which means I was in the top 16 going into the final pod, which means my breakers were just amazing. So we decided to go ahead and draw. We could have played it out and the winner of our round would have had top 16, and the loser would have probably been under 32, making it so they got nothing. So we decided, instead of a 16 and a nothing, we decided to split and do two 32s. And the prize pool was pretty even. Top 32 was $500. Top 16 was only $700. So overall, the EV is just really not worth risking the $500 to get an extra 2. There's not a ton of things there for that. So yeah, we just snapped off a split really quickly, and I ended up going 10, 3, 1. So 10 wins, 3 losses, and a draw. 1 loss I shouldn't have had, but 1 loss or 1 win, I don't know if I would have had a win there because I would have played against somebody else. So hard to say. Count my blessings where I got it, and I ended up in 23rd place. So these were my decks. I had a lot of fun. I was pretty exhausted. I will not fly home mid-GP to stream ever again. That was a mistake. I did not get enough sleep. And I honestly think that that is why I threw away that game, because I was having trouble keeping my eyes open after the 8 rounds in day 1. Yeah, I was beat. It was really tough, and having to get up at 8 in the morning the next day, not eating. Yeah, definitely a strenuous weekend. And, you know, Magic tournaments usually are, but this one was particularly rough. I think maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. Maybe I just can't handle it like I used to. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed playing again. You know, the feel of the cards, the shuffling, being able to actually manage your mana base and tap your mana correctly. I could tell I was rusty, but also after the first few games, I could feel some of those things coming back to me. The way that you pile shuffle to count your deck is, something that is sort of soothing. I don't know how to explain it, but when you compete before and then you take 2 years off, you start to get a little sloppy, a little lazy, I don't know. So you start to miss more triggers. But again, after a couple of games, I started to feel some of those routines or the muscle memory behind how you play good Magic live come back to me, and that was super cool. I enjoyed that. So yeah, that's the end of my story, guys. I wanted to give you guys a little brief overview of the decks and how it went, just because people are going to be asking, and I don't want to have to go through the whole thing every time. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. For those of you who are on the YouTube channel, leave me a comment down below. If you were at the event, let me know how you did. And yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys. I'd like to give a special thank you to those of you who have signed up for our Patreon. I couldn't make this content without you. Also to Cool Stuff Inc. and KMC Sleeves for supporting the channel as well. Definitely check them out and use our discount codes to support the channel.